A phantasm of Rousseau's ideas lingers on in every New Age rural commune, in the parkland surrounding the banker's mansion, even in the suburban garden. So what precisely is Rousseau's idea of natural? When did we fall from grace? How did unnatural society come about? According to Rousseau, this traumatic event occurred when men built the first huts so that they could live together with women. Cohabitation has long been seen as responsible for the fall of man, and women too have their views on this matter. Religion, morality, even psychology can produce strong arguments why these two irreconcilable elements of humanity should be kept apart. Indeed, why they should never have come together in the first place. Traditionally, this has been seen as the undoing, and indeed the doing, of humanity. But Rousseau's argument goes beyond the unnatural behaviour manifested by the domesticated inhabitants of the grass hut, New Age commune, or banker's mansion. We didn't fall from grace. Instead, we were the victims of a con trick. Society came about as a result of a hoax. The first man who enclosed a piece of ground, who then came up with the idea of saying, "This is mine," and found people simple enough to believe him, was the real founder of evil society. The founding fathers of society were impostors. As Rousseau eloquently warned his readers, "You are lost if you forget that the fruits of the earth belong to everyone, and the earth itself belongs to no one." But the duped victims were not without blame. All ran headlong to their chains in hopes of securing their liberty, for they had just wit enough to perceive the advantages of political institutions without experience enough to enable them to foresee the dangers. There are, of course, inconsistencies in such a poetic form of argument. If the natural state of humanity was so good, what could human beings possibly perceive as the advantages of political institutions, and how could these be so great as to prompt them to run headlong to the chains? As with so much of Rousseau, both the man and his ideas, defects in rationality are compensated by perceptive intuitions of human nature. Ignoring his previous argument, he then goes on to claim that in the beginning, nascent society was in fact good. Families lived together, surrounded by other families, and all lived in harmony. This was humanity's golden age. But as we learned to love one another, we also became aware of counterbalancing emotions. The ability to admire brought with it the corrupting ability to be jealous. Neighbours began comparing themselves with those around them. This activity marked the first step toward inequality and at the same time toward vice. The process continued. Each one began to consider the rest, and to wish to be considered in turn, and thus a value came to be attached to public esteem. People came to require or demand respect from those around them. People wanted to be, or be seen to be, better than those around them. In an uncannily prescient passage, Rousseau showed how the current mania for fame is nothing new. Whoever sang or danced best, whoever was the handsomest, the strongest, the most dexterous, or the most eloquent, came to be of most consideration. Fame, the value of public esteem, may often appear trivial, but Rousseau shows that it is one of the earliest or deepest of our communal assessments and needs. He then takes this a stage further. Along with the family and the wish for social respect, the idea of private property came into being. This turned previous inequalities into a visible reality. Some inevitably had more than others. But since property was a reality, a collection of things, it needed physical protection. This gave birth to laws, and a government to enforce these laws. The persistence of government gave rise to formal institutions which had their own devastating effect. Inequalities became solidified in law, power, and stone. Aspects of natural inequality now became mirrored in their artificial counterparts. Physical weakness had its counterpart in social deference. Physical strength was mimicked by social dominance. Rousseau claimed that this was or may well have been the origin of society and law. It may have borne no relation to historical fact, or even to prehistorical sociological truth, but there is no doubting its strength as instructive fairy tale, just as there is no doubting how Rousseau wished us to be instructed. For the advantage of a few individuals, the whole of humanity was subjected to perpetual labour, to slavery, and to wretched humiliation. The concept of property was no less than fatal to humanity, resulting only in horrors. This idea would be carried to its logical conclusion in the following century by the French social reformer Georges Sorel, who coined the emotive slogan, "Property is theft." Meanwhile, Marx would build communism on similar lines. All property would belong to the state, and in the coming socialist utopia, the state would finally wither away. Leaving what? Presumably Rousseau's Eden, where the earth itself belongs to no one. Setting aside the sheer impracticality of this dream, there is a crucial difference between Rousseau and Marx here. Where Marx looked forward to an unrealizable future, Rousseau looked back to a past which he realized had never actually existed. Rousseau was writing a parable. Marx was writing a prophecy. Yet there is no denying the powerful influence of Rousseau's ideas on Marx. Rousseau was the man who put liberty on the social agenda, and all future revolutions would proclaim this as their goal. On the personal level, this same liberty would be central to the whole notion of Romanticism. Marx would famously declare, "Philosophers have only interpreted the world. What matters is to change it." A century beforehand, Rousseau was already putting this into practice. Rousseau's discourse on inequality also includes a pungent analysis of society itself. What is the purpose of society? To provide civil peace, and also to protect the property of those who have any. A society thus benefits all individuals who live within it, but it is of most benefit to the rich, as they have the most to be protected. It also introduces a subtle transformation. To begin with, property was simply found and appropriated. The possession of property was in this sense almost accidental. It was a contingent fact. A man simply fenced off some ground and called it his. Society and the rule of law transformed this contingent fact into ownership by right. It became a legal possession. The landowner rightfully possessed his land. His neighbour without land was kept dispossessed of it. Both situations were maintained by law. In this way, society could never be just, because the rich always benefited most, and the law gave them an unfair advantage in keeping them rich. Such injustices inevitably led to envy, fear, and hatred. Only in society did the interests of individuals conflict with one another. This conflict permeated the entire society and had to be masked by the appropriate manners and courtesy. This was why no society was truly happy. Even the rich were not content. The conflicts of society drove them ever onward, so that they too were never satisfied. Rousseau concluded that inequality was part of the process that separated human beings from their original nature and innocence. In this way, humanity became alienated from its real self. Social man lives constantly outside himself and only knows how to live in the opinion of others, so that he seems to receive the consciousness of his own existence merely from the judgment of others concerning him. Humanity became set adrift, cut off from its original inner certainty. Everything is reduced to appearance. Even honour, friendship, virtue, and often vice too become nothing more than acting and artifice. We are reduced to asking others what we are. We never dare to ask ourselves. All we have to show for ourselves is a frivolous and deceitful appearance, honour devoid of virtue, reason devoid of wisdom, pleasure devoid of happiness. Rousseau's analysis is as recognizable today as it was in pre-revolutionary France. So, what was the answer? Rousseau, in fact, provided this at the very outset of his discourse, which was dedicated to the Republic of Geneva. Beneath this, in his introduction, he characterizes his home city as the ideal state. Here society has succeeded in the impossible. You have achieved happiness. In their small republic, the citizens of Geneva had managed to balance the equality which nature established among men and the inequality which they have managed to institute amongst themselves. This had been achieved because you have no masters other than wise laws made by yourself and administered by upright magistrates of your own choosing. Quite apart from contradicting the contents of the ensuing discourse, this paean of praise for his home city was not entirely devoid of the acting and artifice that Rousseau so condemned. Perhaps he couldn't help this, because he was living in an unavoidably frivolous and deceitful society like Paris. Either way, Rousseau had decided that he wanted to return to Geneva and was unsure of his reception. He had good cause for this. He had renounced his native Calvinism for despised Catholicism, and he had chosen to scandalize public opinion by living openly with a washerwoman who had now produced children. Even a man as insensitive as Rousseau was aware that such things were unlikely to endear him to his Puritan fellow citizens. Perhaps some carefully chosen flattery in the introduction to his book might help. Rousseau had now realized the error of his ways. This had not been easy. His opera had achieved a success when it was performed in Paris, and he now faced the prospect of a successful career as a composer. Fame and money would be his at last. But he would not have this. Perversely true to himself as ever, Rousseau now chose to abandon opera. Such theatre was simply never have come together in the first place. Traditionally, this has been seen as the undoing, and indeed the doing, of humanity. But Rousseau's argument goes beyond the unnatural behaviour manifested by the domesticated inhabitants of the grass hut. When did we fall from grace? How did unnatural society come about? According to Rousseau, this traumatic event occurred when men built the first huts so that they could live together with women. Cohabitation has long been seen as responsible for the fall of man, and women too have their views on this matter. Religion, morality, even psychology can produce strong arguments why these two irreconcilable elements of humanity should be kept apart. Indeed, why they should never. A phantasm of Rousseau's ideas lingers on in every New Age rural commune, in the parkland surrounding the banker's mansion, even in the suburban garden. So what precisely is Rousseau's idea of natural, New Age commune or banker's mansion? We didn't fall from grace. Instead, we were the victims of a con trick. Society came about as a result of a hoax. The first man who enclosed a piece of grass